All right, so it's great to see you all. I spotlighted myself, so if I spotlight myself, you're all safe from the camera. But uh, it's very nice to be able to teach in the office. One day I'll have that opportunity in the future. In the meantime, Baruch Hashem, there's always preschool here, and it's always noisy. But today, because of Pesach, there's no preschool, so I get to teach you in my office. And I'm glad that you joined here on this wonderful Tuesday. As I mentioned, I was contemplating skipping today's class, but then when I looked at what the topic was, I said there's no way I can skip it because we're going to delve right into a lesson from the Exodus of Egypt right here in chapter 31. So how could we skip today's class and read it next week, which is not going to be Passover? We got to study it this week, which is Passover. Um, so it's very timely, and hopefully it'll add some meaning to your holiday of Pesach. All right, with that being said, let us delve right in. First, I'm going to catch you up to what we've done so far, and then I'll take you to where we're going. So we've been in chapter 29 and 30, where all chapters about a case. Let me back up. Tanya starts off telling you kind of, what you're made up of. There's a war going on with you. One side wants to connect you with God. One side wants to distance you from God. Either through doing a mitzvah or not doing a mitzvah. We said the best way to accomplish all of this is through loving God and having awe of God, and that comes through meditation. But that brings us to question in chapter 29 and 30. What happens if meditation is not working for you? What if you meditate, you think about all the different meditations he gives you them in short. There are other places where the meditations are at length. So what if you have all these meditations, yet it's not working for you? So he said, in that case, we have to take the advice of the Zohar, and we need to crush ourselves. We need to crush ourselves. By crushing ourselves, that means to think of thoughts that show how lowly we are. Okay? But then he continues and says in chapter 31, but the purpose is not to remain crushed. The purpose is not to remain depressed, because at the end of the day, as Tanya says earlier, if you want to win a war against your evil inclination, which it is a war, you need to be happy. It's a war. In order to be successful at a war, you need to be happy. And so from there, he starts in this chapter, he makes 3 points about the sadness that you brought upon yourself. He says, number one, the sadness is a necessary evil, because sometimes in order to fight, something smelling. Just going to close the door here to the kitchen. Check it out afterwards. Maybe the garbage. In order to fight the evil inclination, we need to use some of its own medicine, and that is depression. The evil inclination loves depression. It knows when it makes us depressed, it will get us to stop doing good. So we need to use some of its own medicine. All right, we started with depression. Right after we went to depression, then the Tanya says, okay, we understand you need to use depression, but really depression is only for a moment. These thoughts will make you depressed for a moment. But then after depression should come bitterness. We said bitterness is not the same as depression. Depression is more sad about how much of a failure I am, and bitterness is focusing on how great I could be, and it's bitter where I am right now. So again, where depression is a very self-judgmental process. At least, again, we're not necessarily clinical depression, though that may also present. We're talking about the Tanya's depression. But bitterness, we mentioned a lot of reasons why bitterness is different from depression, but one of the simple ones is, again, depression is focused on me, and bitterness is focused on what could be and what mission I'm here for. Not so much a ruling on myself, but I'm bitter over the fact that this is what the situation is, but that is energizing that I'm going to want to do something about it. That was step number 2 of the chapter. Step number 3 of the chapter was, not only do we only get depressed for a little bit, not only do we move away from depression to bitterness, but actually being bitter and depressed for a small moment can actually bring us to greater joy. How so? Joy is always greater when it's been preceded by something terrible, right? So just to bring a very unfortunate example, when the hostages came back, and may there be many more very soon, amen, when the hostages came back, there was a great joy. Everybody was happy. Now, people would not be as happy to see them if they had just gone off a little hike, got lost for a day, right? So, based on basically relative to how bad something is, that's how much the joy is when you leave it. And so, similarly, we said, is the more, once we understand how depressing it is, our spiritual state, well, then when we do a mitzvah, when we redeem ourselves from that bad spiritual state, now there's all the more reason to be joyous, right? And so we discussed last week, if you get someone who's really not involved, sure, to eat matzah, to put on tefillin, to put up a mezuzah, all these different things, the joy over there is so much greater than otherwise would be apparent. That was step number 3. Step number 4, in this chapter, we said that this is the meaning of teshuvah, repentance. Teshuvah means returning its soul to its happy place. In other words, teshuvah doesn't have to apply only when we sin. Just the fact that I'm here in this world, even chasing, let's say, worldly pleasures, that alone is something the godly soul is not interested in. And so really everybody can do teshuvah. When you return your soul to a higher spiritual state, that's teshuvah. That's what real teshuvah is. It's not so much a focus on the bad that you've done, but where you're getting to. And all this, sorry, I must be tired. So all this brings to what we're going to talk about today. That is the Exodus from Egypt. That's why I said this class is all about, it is very important to say on Pesach, because the lesson we're going to read here is very much in line with the times, as we are, of course, teaching this class during Passover. Now, I said before the class I was trying to figure something out about this chapter, and I'm still not 100% sure, but I have some theories. So we kind of just ended on the point that when you leave somewhere terrible and you get somewhere good, there's a greater joy, right? So again, when you leave a bad situation, you get to a good situation, that's a reason to be joyous, that's a reason to be happy. And therefore, we said in Teshuvah, every single person should be joyous when their souls leave a bad situation. But he also said something interesting. He said, how could you be happy? How is it possible to be happy? Asked last week. When you do something good, when you know at the same time you're not perfect in all other areas, right? That was the question last week. And so he answered, you need to focus on the important things of life. Your soul is the most important part of your life. So yes, your animal soul, your body is still very lowly and may drag you down sometimes, but you focus on the soul. And because you focus on the soul, you can be happy in this moment when you're doing something good, even though you know that you yourself are not such a great person, even though you know yourself that your body still wants to go back to the same Netflix and popcorn eating and wasting time, right? You don't want to sit and study all day, right? But you can still be happy when you do a mitzvah because you focus on the joy of your soul, and the soul is the most important thing. And as he said last week, the joy of your soul be the primary focus. You're not allowed to be compromised and confused by the sad state of your body. Now he's going to say that this is actually this idea that we could focus on the good and ignore the bad for a moment and be happy about the good is actually, and now I think I figured it out, is actually what the Exodus from Egypt is. This is what the Tanya is saying here. Again, we're in page 357. We'll read it in a moment. But this is actually what the Exodus of Egypt was. If you look at the story of the Exodus of Egypt, it's a very strange story. When the Jews were going to leave Egypt, what did Moses ask Pharaoh for? Before, when Moshe first approached Pharaoh, what was he asking for that Pharaoh was refusing? What was his request?
It was to let the people go into the desert and worship their God.
All right.
Serve their God.
Right. He was asking them to go in the desert and worship their God for how long?
Oh, was it like 3 days or something like that?
Yeah, it's very good. Lyle's got his fingers up. Yep, 3 days. Yep, 3 days. So the Jews, Moses never asked Pharaoh for a long-term escape. That shows you how crazy Pharaoh is. But again, the Jews were always asking for 3 days, which all the commentaries want to know. Why ask for 3 days? Why not just fast forever. In fact, this story plays out with the next part of the holiday of Passover. So many people know the beginning of Passover is holidays, right? So Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday was holiday, but also at the end, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, there's also holiday. What is that holiday? What does that celebrate at the end of the holiday? It's also Yom Tov. Anybody? What does it celebrate? The last days, the seventh and eighth day of Passover. What does it celebrate?
Shabbat?
Huh?
Shabbat?
No.
The Feast of
Passover
Mashiach.
specific. Huh?
Oh,
The
the
Feast of
Festival of Mashiach.
Mashiach.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so the eighth day we do Mashiach, but okay, but everybody does the seventh day. What is the seventh day? Why is the seventh day of Passover a holy day?
Is it
Okay, let
is
me
it
look
the
at my
splitting,
calendar.
the splitting of the Red Sea?
Very good. Yes, the splitting of the Red Sea. Yes,
Oh, thank you.
yes, splitting of the sea. So, on the seventh day, after they had left Egypt, God split the sea. So why was it 7 days later? Why did God split the sea 7 days later? So you say, well, that's when the Egyptians got there. Okay, but the explanation actually is so why 7 days later? What happened 7 days later? So it says the first 3 days the Jews were traveling in the desert. Pharaoh wasn't suspicious. When they continued traveling further on the fourth day, that's when it says that Pharaoh sent spies with the Jews when they left. Again, he was only letting them go for 3 days. That's all Moses ever asked them for. That's why he chased after them. So again, after the third day, when they continued traveling further on the fourth day, the spies came back to Pharaoh, and they told Pharaoh they're not coming back. And then Pharaoh chased after them, and he met them at the sea on the seventh day. Now, again, the Jews were traveling very slow because they had a bunch of kids and livestock and whatever, and Pharaoh traveled with an army. So that's why, even though the Jews continued traveling, Pharaoh caught up with them on the seventh day. But that is why the splitting of the sea happens on the seventh day, simply because the Pharaoh was chasing them because he only let them go for 3 days.
Rabbi, I have a question about
Yes.
it. So
Yes.
let's think about this for a second.
Yeah.
The Jews left in the middle of the night with all the gold of Egypt.
Okay,
Did
so they
Pharaoh
actually
really think they were only going for 3 days? Really, with all the gold of Egypt?
Okay, good question. I'll answer you. Number
Please.
one, first of all, they didn't leave in the middle of the night. Pharaoh was pushing them out of the middle of the night. They left by the next day in the midday. But second of all, it says clearly in the Torah, they borrowed from them. They borrowed. What was their excuse? They said, we don't know what God needs to serve him. We're going to borrow gold from you. Torah clearly says the word borrow. They borrowed from the Egyptians, everything. That was their whole thing. That was their whole gig. They were borrowing stuff. Yep. Yeah. So here we have the Jews say they want to leave for 3 days. And the question is, if God's pulling out all the stops, he's pulling out 10 plagues, he's pulling out death of the firstborn, just ask to go forever. What's the whole trick of 3 days? So the answer is, from a mystical perspective, what we're talking about over here is that sometimes we're so stuck and mired in our physicality, in our worldliness. We're so stuck in our opposite of spirituality, let's call it, that the only way to escape it is to run away. That the only way to escape it is to pull off a trick. And without like saying, I'm leaving. And actually, the fact they said they were going for 3 days, but the point what I'm trying to say is what the Tanya's going to say, is you might even say it was more for the Jews than it was for the Egyptians to say 3 days. The Jews themselves were iffy about leaving Egypt. They were there for so long. They weren't so excited. In fact, as the old saying goes, right? You know, you could take the Jew out of Brooklyn, you can't take the Brooklyn out of the Jew, right? You could take the Jew out of Egypt, you couldn't take the Egypt out of the Jew. We see the Jews continued pining for Egypt. Egypt was still a very much part of their psyche. It took 40 years to get out of their system, really. And that's a powerful lesson for each and every single one of us. Is we're talking about over here, how can I celebrate? How can I celebrate my spirituality? How can I celebrate that mitzvah that I do when I know that me, myself, I'm very mired in the very physical world around me. I know that right after I go to shul, I'm going to watch the ball game. Or right after Shabbat is over, I revert to the usual weekday me. or after the morning services, I'll be myself. I'll go golfing, whatever it is. So the Tanya says that's true, and there's a precedent to it. If you want to look back, you're not the first person to experience it. The Jews in Egypt experienced that as well, and the only way God was able to accomplish any spirituality for them was by having them, so to speak, run very fast without thinking too much. In other words, sometimes if we try to think ourselves out of our problems, we say I'm going to become more spiritual every single day. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we just need to do it, right? So let's say you know yourself, you're very much involved in the world, and someone inspires you. Keep Shabbat. You're not ready there step by step. First, I need to do this, and I need to do that. Sometimes there's times we need to run away, and so this is a precedent for the concept that he was just talking about a moment, where it's true. There's an idea that sometimes we, on the one hand, can experience a redemption of the soul, while really inside our bodies are not very holy and spiritual at that time. So that is the lesson of the Exodus. The lesson of the Exodus is a lesson to us that we can be spiritual even when we are so not spiritual. We can have the opportunity to connect to the divine even when we know the next moment will be dragged down. Because, and as he said, because we need to focus on the positive right now. Just as a parenthetically, the Kabbalists tell us, and the Chassidus brings this, is that if God did not redeem the Jews at the exact moment he redeemed them, they would be stuck there forever. They were so mired in immorality and physicality that that had they stayed there any longer, they would have completely lost any Jewish identity, and God would not have been able to take them out. That shows you how bad it was. And so they had to do, so to speak, a runaway. They had to do a runaway. You ever were in an overnight camp, you do a runaway? They had to do a runaway. And so that's what he's telling us, is that sometimes in order to accomplish teshuvah, in order to return our souls to God, we cannot wait till step by step we reach a certain level. We need to just take it upon ourselves and do it. And go ahead and do it. So let's take a look at some text. We're in section 5 on page 357. So let's take a look here. So he says like this, and this approach of redeeming the soul from its captivity is a kind of spiritual exodus from Egypt, as we shall see. Concerning the Exodus, Scripture states that after requesting from Pharaoh to be released for just 3 days, the people fled and escaped Egypt permanently. Now, at first glance, it seems bizarre that things had to happen this way. For after witnessing the 10 plagues, wouldn't Pharaoh have been forced to let them go, even if they had asked to go free forever? Rather, this was not a restriction stemming from Pharaoh, but due to the evil in the Israelites' animal soul, which was still in its full power in the left chamber of their hearts, where the animal soul resides, and the evil made them unwilling to leave Egypt permanently. So it was a trick for the Jews. They didn't want to leave, or they couldn't bring themselves fully to do it. The Jews did not ask to become completely free from the evil of Egypt because they were still drawn to it. They still had some Egypt in their soul, for it was not until the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai that their impurity departed after the counting of the Omer, which we're in the middle of. Which don't forget today. Today is 2 days of the Omer. Don't forget to download your Omer app. That their animal souls were fully free from the evils of Egypt. Nevertheless, while their animal souls were not ready to leave Egypt, their divine souls definitely were. So this goes back to the dichotomy we were talking about earlier between what our godly soul wants, what our animal soul wants. So leaving Egypt is a form of expression of our godly soul doing what it wants, even though the animal soul is not holding there yet. Sometimes you can run ahead with the godly soul and let the animal soul catch up. They tell a story. Someone once came to the Rabbi and said, "What's this? You put on tefillin with people who don't know anything, who aren't involved in anything, who don't care about anything." The guy said, "It's like putting on tefillin on. It's like putting a tie on someone who's not clothed. What's the point of the tefillin?" So again, there's many different answers, of course, to the question. But the Rebbe used to answer individuals, not questions. So the Rebbe's answer to this individual was if you give a person who's not wearing any clothes a tie, he'll think about, oh, wearing a tie, maybe I should put on a shirt, maybe I should put on some pants. So the same thing is you put on film with someone once, is then they'll think, oh, I put on film, maybe I should do something else, maybe I should do another thing. And that story has played out many, 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 many times. And that's the same thing over here, what we're saying, is sometimes we need to have that exodus from Egypt. We don't wait until the opportune moment to do the mitzvah. If we're inspired, we go ahead and we do it, even though it doesn't make sense. And then, slowly but surely, that will drag on and bring other parts of our life and elevate other parts of our life. So similarly, like the Jews, that they ran out of Egypt, they weren't up to it. But 49 days later, they caught up to, so to speak, that spiritual level. Then 40 days after that, they lost it. They sinned again. That's the story of our lives, okay? That's the story of our lives. The sin of the golden calf, right? So we escape Egypt, and 49 days later, we're at a hot spiritual high. We get the Torah, and then we drop. That's don't think you're anything new. It's all of us. Let's continue. So he says, yet despite the inertia of their animal souls, their focus and desire was to release their divine souls from exile and Sitra Achra, the impurity of Egypt, and connect to God. It was this tension between the animal soul and the divine soul that resulted in them initially resisting and subsequently freeing from Egypt. Initially, they weren't prepared to ask Pharaoh to leave Egypt permanently, since their animal souls were still drawn to evil and unwilling to leave. But once they had left temporarily and Sinai was inside, the yearning of their divine souls to leave Egypt could no longer be held back, and they tore themselves away from the pull of their animal souls to leave forever. So that's what he's saying. He's saying you just need to get out of it. You just need to be able to get out of it. So this goes back to what he said earlier. We need to be able to focus on our godly soul, ignore our animal soul for a second. Now he's giving kind of a tip. How do you ignore your animal soul for a second? The way to do that, sometimes you need to run away. You need to put yourself in a different situation. This is, by the way, why the power of community is very important. To be able to put yourself in a different situation, community is very helpful for that. Right? So if someone wants to do something, if they start doing it in a community, there's suddenly, I don't want to say peer pressure, social pressure, there's or social uplifting, whatever it is, that allows you to stick with that, right? So if someone decides to do something good and they show up to shul to do it, or they show up in a community event or something else, when someone is part of a community, these changes, these radical changes, have better staying power. Or sometimes, as the Rabbi would say, even if it's not a community type of mitzvah, if you can share your good resolution with other people, that alone will help you as well. This is why sometimes it's better to do a good deed sometimes with a group, and or pretty much all the time, than doing it by yourself. Even though doing it by yourself, you might say I could do it faster, and I could do it better, and I could do it quicker. But the staying power of a community, aside from all the other benefits, is very powerful. They tell a story of a community member who didn't feel the need to show up to community things. Felt I could pray better in my home, and I could do all these different things better in my house. I could do it better without joining a community. But so the rabbi showed up to his house, and they had a barbecue going on, and they had a bunch of coals. So the rabbi took tongs, took one of the coals and separated it, and shortly thereafter the coal went out. And so the guy got the message, is that a coal by itself will go out. When it's with other coals, it can last a lot longer. An ember will go out much quicker when it's by itself. So similarly, the Jewish people, they left as a group, and that alone, I believe, I'm just adding, this is my addition, the Tanya's not talking about it here, per se, it's just my addition, is I'm just adding on to what the Tanya is saying. When we want to run away from something, we want to do something positive, we do it as a group. So, for example, could you possibly learn Tanya better yourself? No. Okay, no, I'm kidding. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to tell you can't. But joining something as a group is always helpful. And I do that myself till today in certain areas of my studies. I join cohorts or groups. Even though to some extent I study by myself, but I'm following along with a group, and that alone gives a certain level of a push and an inspiration to study and to learn. So That is, that's probably just Amazon. We'll leave the Amazon to their own devices. Let me just tell them to leave it by the door. 1 second, I think it's gonna. And leave it there. Okay. That's a very important feature. They were delivering garbage bags. Without that, that's a problem. Anyways, so this is the idea that we're reading over here, is that the Exodus of Egypt in our own souls means sometimes we need to take a moment and just run away. Take a moment, and even though we're not quote unquote there yet, allow ourselves to escape to God's tower. So that's what he continues. So let's read this inside. As the following 3 verses suggest, that God helps a person escape from the pull of a difficult situation. God is my strength and my fortress and my escape in a day of affliction. My high tower, my escape. He is my escape. So this explains you a lot of the Psalms that you read. So he's quoting here from Psalms and other places, but you read in a lot of places, God is my fortress. He's my escape. And so what does that mean? Well, King David may have meant literally, but he also means figuratively, is that you can run away to God. The understanding of Exodus bears much similarity to the plight of the Benoni. Like the Israelites who could not rid themselves of their pull towards Egypt, the Benoni cannot rid himself of the animal soul's allure. So you'll never lose that allure, but that does not stop the Benoni. But that does not stop the Benoni from devoting all his energies to liberating the divine soul, just as the Israelites fled with full force towards Sinai. So the point lesson here, the important lesson, by the way, it's a matzah yarmulke, in case you're wondering. The important lesson here is that you don't have to reach a certain spiritual state. You don't have to have rid yourself of your desires in order to do something positive. I think that's been the Tanya's message the entire time, really. It just comes out in different areas, right? That's really the whole idea of the Benoni. The Benoni is someone who will never fully transform his inner desires. And so the Tanya is once again telling you is that's where the Exodus of Egypt comes out to. And that's why we read about the Exodus of Egypt every single day, because sometimes we need to do that runaway. But all that only applies nowadays. I was going to say, but when Mashiach comes, we won't have to run away, right? When the Jews left Egypt, they had to run away. But once the world is perfected, there's no more running away. Running away only applies when we're at Benoni level or lower, when we're at a level where we have evil within us, when we're in Egypt. But when Mashiach comes, we're going to be so elevated, we won't need to run away. And so that's what he continues. Therefore, this stands in contrast to the future era, when God will remove the spirit of impurity from the earth, eliminating the sitra and avoiding the need to flee from it. And about this future time, the verse says, you will not go out in haste, nor by flight, for God will go before you, etc. So Isaiah says, when Mashiach comes, we will not leave in haste. So, right? So the prophets themselves point to this idea that Egypt we left in haste, and Mashiach we will not go in haste. Why? Why is that so important? Because it's indicative of the spirituality of the Jewish people during the Egypt, which they were more like Beinanim, or lower, right? Where they had evil within their souls. But when Mashiach comes, when God will remove the spirit of impurity, where we'll all be the level of a tzaddik, well then, you don't need to run away. Then you could go calmly. You could walk calmly. You don't need to run. You could walk calmly because it goes step by step by step at that point in time. All right, with the Sitra Achar, the animal soul neutralized, there'll be no need to flee violently from it to escape its pull. Rather, we move forward peacefully. Now, the next section of Tanya almost flips everything we just said on its head. I'm sorry to tell you. Not for a bad reason, but I'll explain it so you don't get confused, or hopefully you don't get confused if you're not already confused. So the next section of Tanya really is going to temper what we just said a moment ago. We basically said a moment ago that the animal soul could drag you down. You need to run away from it. But the truth is that is only sometimes. most of the time, or we want to work with our animal soul. Because we were placed in this world to elevate our body, our animal soul, and the world around us. So, though I may never fully transform my animal soul, I can partially transform it. Very simply put, a Beinoni just means someone who always has physical desires, doesn't always naturally want to do the right thing, but those physical desires can change over time. I think any of you might know this, right? When we were teens, we may have had certain things and pulls and desires that we wanted to do. That as we get older and more mature, we don't care for them anymore. We've grown out of it. And similarly in our spiritual lives, we can actually transform our animal soul to some extent if we refrain from certain animalistic desires. Over time, those animalistic desires do become lessened, and as well, we can also train our animal soul to some extent to desire godliness. Because as I said many times, the animal soul is not bad. The animal soul really just wants to enjoy. But if you can show the animal soul that godliness, that Torah is the most enjoyable thing, then the animal soul is on board with you. You can study Torah, and your animal soul is going to be happy about it. Now, I will say something interesting. Sometimes the initial sitting down to learn, you need just your godly soul. But after that, it could be your animal soul. Your animal soul will enjoy it too. It says, our sages tell us actually, a person should always study a subject that their heart desires. You should study subjects of the Torah that you like. What if you say, I don't like any part of Torah? Over time, Torah is so beautiful, so everything fits so perfectly and so well rounded and so deep, and the logic is so fascinating. I don't see how someone could not like the study of Torah. I can see how someone would not want to sit down and do it, because the nature of human being is inertia. They do nothing. It's like a teenager just wants to stay in bed all day. That's the nature of the human being. But once you're doing something, Torah is something beautiful. You can get your animal soul on board with that. And so this is the next part of Tanya. Is he's going to end off here. Is though he said sometimes you need to run away from your animal soul, you should know that most of the time you need to work with your animal soul. Why? Because that is our job here. And this all goes back to the beginning of the chapter, why we shouldn't be depressed. He's going to tell you, why shouldn't you be depressed over your animal soul? So his first answer was, number one is focus on what's important. Focus on your godly soul. Run away from your animal soul. The second point is going to be, actually remember that God created you. God created you with an animal soul. Why did he create you with an animal soul? Because he knows that you could work with it. And he knows that you can do something about it. He knows that you can become a more elevated and spiritual being despite or with your animal soul. This will touch upon the concept of dira b'tachtonim. This will touch upon the whole reason why we're created. Okay? In later chapters, he's going to get to what our whole mission is in general. But why are we even alive? What are we trying to do? And the answer is, of course, God placed us here in this world to make a dwelling place for God here on this earth. But that is more of a discussion he's going to discuss later. But already over here, it's going to play a role in that one should not be depressed. One should not be depressed over your spiritual situation. If you remember that who put you in this situation? God. God knows what he's doing. God knows what he's doing. And he wants you to work with what you're given. And so that alone is a very inspiring and meaningful message. And that's something I need to remind people a lot of times about. Is like, who do you think you are? Like, God knows exactly who you are. He knows how he created you. He knows what he's done. So don't be depressed. You know, if you were born not being able to read Hebrew, or you're born not going to yeshiva, you know, like people say, Rabbi, if I was like you, if I was born going to yeshiva, if I grew up religious, if I was lucky like you, I'd be different. But it's immaterial. God knows who you are. He created you the way you are. And he knows your upside. And he knows that you can work with yourself to slowly become more spiritual every single day. And so that is the last section of this chapter. Again, the whole concept of making a dwelling place for God on this earth is going to be discussed more later. But we do discuss it here as well in short, because it's a very important meditation. And again, the meditation is basically, we said a moment ago, we shouldn't be depressed over our sad spiritual state because I need to focus on the good. And sometimes the good needs to run away from the bad. But now he says, but you don't always need to run away from the bad. Sometimes you need to work with it. You need to work with your animal soul. Because that's the real work. The real work is to work with your animal soul. That's the hard job. So let's take a look here. In order that this sense of mitzvot as teshuvah mentioned above section 4 be with more dignity and more power from the depths of your heart, and in order that your soul should rejoice with additional light and joy, consider the following. A deepening of this experience will happen when you will further reflect in your heart the knowledge and discernment. Remember, he's always going back to meditation. So again, Adler is going to tell you, what should you be thinking about to make you happy despite your sad spiritual state? His first answer was, just leave the bad behind, just run away, focus on the good. His second answer is no, to find comfort from your distress and sorrow. After saying to yourself the above meditation, it's definitely true that I am very far from God, you should continue the following empowering meditation. However, while I am very far from God, I was not the one who created myself. And I'll read that again because it's so important to read. However, while I am very far from God, I was not the one who created myself. And why has God done such a thing? Why would God create you with such a lowly animal soul that pulls you to such places? Why would God create you born into such naturally not conducive spiritual situations? Right? Why would God create you not born religious or whatever else it is? Lama as Hashem kazos. This is a question we all ask ourselves. Why did God do such a thing? To downgrade a piece of his blessed light, which fills all the world and transcends all the world, and his presence, everything is considered zero, to place it in a despicable body, a serpent skin, a body which came from a putrid seminal drops. He's asking, again, he's still the question. You're asking yourself, I didn't make myself. Okay, so who made me? God. Why would God take a piece of himself, which God fills the entire world? God is, everything in front of him is not. God is so high, and he took a piece of himself and he stuck it within me, which I am as low as you can imagine. Serpent skin, despicable body, putrid drop. There's one on the serpent skin. It's an interesting discussion, but not for now. But the physicality of our bodies is called mashcha dechivya by the Zohar. The Zohar calls it the serpent skin. Anyways, so he says there is no other explanation other than this downgrade must be for the purpose of an even greater upgrade. Now, when you go flying in an airplane, if they downgrade you a class, it's not because they want to give you a better seat, right? But the airlines are not God. Well, actually, then they have to pay you off, actually. But the point is that we believe that God always does good. Therefore, any setbacks are always only part of a future growth. Just like when you jump, you need to bend down to jump higher, right? Just like when you want to jump really high, you need to stand really far back so you can get a good long running jump. Well, if you want to shoot a rubber band, you got to pull it really far back to shoot it really far. The same thing is over here. Is the only explanation why God would have taken a piece of his soul and put it so low is because ultimately, through going so low, it would get to higher than it was before. Namely, to bring it to God, the whole energizing animal soul from Klipas Noga and its garments, which are its thought, speech, and action, through their immersion in action, speech, and thought of Torah. So, when you think Torah words, we mentioned this earlier, your godly soul has to interface with your animal soul. There's only, okay, your godly soul has to work in your body through the animal soul. So if you're thinking words of Torah, your godly soul is making your animal soul think words of Torah. If you're speaking, if you're doing a mitzvah, if you're giving charity, your godly soul has to interface with your animal soul. So by virtue of your godly soul coming down to this earth, it's on a mission to elevate the animal soul. If you want to get even more Kabbalistic, it says the animal soul is rooted in a higher place than our godly soul. But I don't want to go down that path. The point is that by the godly soul coming down to this earth, the godly soul can accomplish something unique that would not have been able to be done when it was up in heaven. It would not be able to elevate the animal soul. So we need to remember, when we feel ourselves lowly spiritually, I did not create my low spiritual state. God created that. And then there's also that my godly soul can interface with my animal soul, which is so low. And by interfacing with my animal soul, it elevates it. In our earlier meditation section 3, we focused only on the joy of redeeming the divine soul from the body. The body itself remained despicable and unredeemable. In this meditation, a new element is added that the body is redeemable too. This will lead to an even greater joy. Later in chapter 35 to 37, we will explain this elevation of the body and the animal soul at length, how this is the purpose for which the world is created. And so, spoiler alert, you're going to want to really see chapters 35 to 37. That's so important. It gives us the whole Chabad outlook on life and living and why we're here on this earth and Mashiach and everything else. It's all chapters 35 to 37, but we're giving you a hint of it now, is that, as we said, it's not a bad thing that you're so lowly. It actually gives an opportunity for your godly soul to elevate something that is very low. So again, once you think to yourself, I didn't create myself. Who created me? God created me. Why did God create me? Must be it came down to accomplish something it couldn't have done before. It was a downgrade for a greater upgrade. What's that greater upgrade? That greater upgrade is the ability of the godly soul to elevate the animal soul, which would not be possible if it stayed up in heaven. So now he says, this being the case that my godly soul only came down to this earth to elevate my animal soul, my lowly animal soul, I shall do the following, and this will be my singular mission all the days of my life, to place in these mitzvos the life of my spirit and of my soul, as the verse states, to you, O God, I lift up my soul, Psalms 25, which means to bind my thought and speech with God's thought and speech, this being through the study of the body of Jewish law, which has been codified for us, and through binding my actions to him through observing mitzvos. All right, so that's very simple. That we need to study Torah and do mitzvahs. I mean, that's really what we're here. The 613 is studying Torah and do mitzvahs. People come with all different ideas of what it means to elevate the world. It simply means it's Torah and mitzvahs. And also through binding my actions through observing the mitzvahs. This is why Torah is described as restoring the soul. We say in the Shabbat prayers, the commandments of God are just. They give life to the soul. They restore the soul. There's other places. Well, that's actually give joy to the soul. Sorry, that's the next line. It's on the next line. Give joy to the soul. Meaning that it returns and restores the soul to its source and root. And concerning this elevation of not only the divine soul, but the animal soul too, the verse states, the precepts of God are just, rejoicing the heart. Okay? So, this is the short version of what he's going to talk in chapter 35 to 37. But that's the end of the chapter 31, in which he ends off on the most positive note possible, I believe, in my opinion. Because he started off the chapter trying to find ways for you to be happy, and he works it up layer by layer by layer. First of all, you're only depressed for a little while. Then it's bitterness. It's not depression. Then focus on your soul. Don't focus on your, don't focus on your lowly body. But he finally ends off is that, you know what? Even the fact that you have such a lowly body is actually, there's a purpose there. There's a reason for it. It's a benefit. It's a benefit for your godly soul, because your godly soul was created to your godly soul came so low to elevate your body. So the fact that your body is so low is actually a boon. It's actually a wonderful thing because you have the opportunity to elevate your godly soul. And if I want to connect this to actually some of our previous chapters, remember we spoke about the chapter of not judging other people. Because who knows how difficult their spiritual struggle is. What I learned from that, connecting with this chapter, is someone who is so lowly spiritual, let's say someone who's even lower than me, when they do a mitzvah, let's say I do 100 mitzvahs, but their one mitzvah is even greater. Their one mitzvah, based on what we're reading here, elevates such a, I don't want to say lowly spiritual body, but that's kind of what it seems to be saying. It's saying if God created you so low, I use the word low, don't think that I'm judging anybody as being low, but I mean so coarse, so physical, so opposite of spiritual. If God created you and then you do a mitzvah at that state, you have elevated to God something that nobody else can bring to God. You can elevate to God something that is so low, to put it that way. Really, again, this all goes back to the world vision of the Tanya, that we're put on this lowly world to elevate this lowly world to God. So someone who is even lower can elevate something that's even lower, right? I only reach so far. Some people dig deeper in the earth. Some people dig deeper in the earth, right? Some people get the diamonds from the depths of the earth. This is why the Baal Shem Tov used to look at the simple Jews like diamonds. He said, you don't need to be the most lettered Jew to bring to God something great. Even a simple Jew can bring such great joy and happiness to God. And so therefore, as long as we remember, and this is something we always, I think this line that he says, I did not make myself. To me, one of the most powerful lines of Tanya. I did not make myself. Why did God do such a thing? When you think about that, when you meditate on that, I did not create myself. God created me. Why did he do such a thing? There's a reason, there's a purpose. Automatically, one will not be depressed over their spiritual state. One will be energized to use wherever you're at and whatever you manage to do and to elevate that to God. And to me, that is the powerful meditation of this chapter. I want to say, before I end the class, just on the note of this chapter, there's a great song that was put out depicting what we played it once, depicting the soul, the journey of the soul, how first it doesn't want to come to this earth. Yes. I'm just going to share the link here if someone wants to watch the song. It's playing an ad. Okay. I'm going to copy this link. If anybody wants to listen to the song, it's a great song. It's all about the soul and the soul's journey. So you can copy this link. You can listen to the song all about the soul, how the soul originally doesn't want to come down to this earth, but there's greatness that can be accomplished in this earth that cannot be accomplished in heaven. So if we put this in a little bit of perspective, angels are very spiritual, much more spiritual than even the greatest tzaddik. God says, I don't want that. I want people on this earth. And within this earth, there's people at all different levels. And we all have to know that God created us, and he understands us, and he knows us. And we just have to make sure that every single day we're trying to be a little bit better than yesterday. Now, if we fall down, we wipe ourselves off and we move along. If we fall down, if we fail one day, wipe ourselves up, we move along, we pick ourselves up, and we know that as long as we try our best every single day, it's God who created the situations. And this also goes back to the Chabad belief in divine providence. Is that even the spiritual state you find yourself in, even if sins brought you there, but the place where you are was brought to you by God. Just to bring in an example from the business world. Let's say you made a bad business decision and you lost $1 million. The divine providence would tell you that the fact that you lost $1 million would have happened anyways. Now you have to learn from your bad business decision and not make those decisions again. But don't view that you control your destiny, that you can change the future. We have to do what we have to do, but then the rest is up to God. So the only time, by the way, you may not get blessings is if you do nothing. because it says our work is a vessel for God's blessing. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because some people might say, Rabbi, I get it. God created me a certain level low, but since then I've brought myself even lower. Again, if you know God a little bit, if you know about God a little bit, God knows about that too. Okay, He was familiar with what you would do as well. And so wherever you are in life, wherever you've gotten to, there is the opportunity and the ability for you to elevate yourself. And when you elevate yourself, there's great joy in that because you're going to elevate something that nobody else could have elevated, only you, because of the unique place that your life and spirituality is in. So I hope this has been a inspirational class. And just to end off, I said that a couple times. The Tanya did end off with 2 points at the end, and you should remember those 2 points. There are times where we do need to just run away and do the right thing. And there are times where we need to work with our animal soul. And you have to judge based on the situation when you could work directly and when you need to first run away and then come back to it and pull it up along. All right, thank you all for joining, and I'll open up for questions. I just don't want to start the next chapter. It's too early.